Today's topic is going to be somewhat of a summary, and I'm so glad that people, if they missed the first two, will have the opportunity to get those. But the topic here is stopping points. It's when the rubber hits the road. Why do we stall? Why is the car stuck in the driveway? Because have you ever heard yourself saying or thinking any of these things like, I'm not clear about my topic or how to start. I have too many ideas. I don't know how to organize my content. I don't have time to write. I have big dreams for a book, but I can't seem to get started. I'm afraid. We talked about that the last time, not being seen. I have a writer's block, or I'm not a writer, which, by the way, you don't have to be a writer to be an author. I don't know what steps to take. I don't know how to publish my book. What if the book flops and nobody reads it? There must be something wrong with me. Those are stopping points. And I could go on with the list, but the chances are that you've said at least one of those things to yourself. I know I have. And your family, your friends, your partner, your colleagues. And the top three challenges of these stopping points is what we talked about in the very first conversation, which is lack of clarity. It includes being unsure of what to write about, unsure where to start, and overall lack a mission and vision for your book. The second one we talked about on the last conversation, and it's dangerously low confidence. It's the fear of being seen. This includes imposter syndrome, fear of failure or success, and lack of support to get your book written and published and out into the world. And today, number three, the really, to me, almost the bigger overshadowing than the first two, is inconsistent commitment. This is a big one. You know, time management and organization and prioritizing is kind of a boring topic. I can remember years ago in San Diego, I used to teach a class on procrastination. I used to teach a class on time management. It's not very creative. It's not very fun, but I would like to read a quote. And that quote is from a German writer and statesman, Goethe, who lived in the 1700s, long before social media, cell phones, and the crazy pace of the life we lead today. And yet his words are still true. His words can still be a guiding force, a guiding light for us. And his words are, I'm going to read it because it's kind of long. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That is the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. So we can say we want to write a book. We can say we want to take a leadership role. We can say we have a message. And truly in our hearts and in our soul, we feel that. But until we commit to do it, then all the other things, lack of clarity, dangerously low self-confidence, all of those are the devil on the shoulder that just supports that lack of commitment. Because if we are committed, we'll find the clarity. We'll get over the desire to not be seen, because our desire will be not from coming the focus on us. What will people think of us? Will the book be any good? That's all inward focus. And when we turn it out to what we're going to do for the world, what message do we have for the world? And what difference is it going to make to the people who we want to speak to? And that is the inner commitment to get that message out.
I identify clearly with what you're saying. What do you do when somebody comes into your business or into your sphere and they say, hey, I really want to do this, but, and they start doing the but game with you, or the I need this, I need that first. What do you say?
That's their fear talking, because we'll always find reasons not to do something. That's the logical part. And it is the devil on our shoulder, because the devil's going to show up. And I just use that metaphorically, but we all have that inside of ourselves, whether we call it the shadow self, whatever, the terms are that are appropriate for ourselves. But it's the justification of why we can't do it, which means we're not committed. If
Mm-hmm.
we're committed, there is nothing that's going to stop us. Nothing. Different example, but you know this about me, Anna. About 5 years ago, I walked the Camino de Santiago, which is a pilgrimage that goes across Spain. It's 500 miles. Some people walk parts of it. I had a desire for 20 years to do the whole thing. And as the years went by, I kept thinking, oh, it's too late. It's too late. It's too late. And then I started getting, as we know, when something's on our radar, I started getting signs, hearing about a friend of a friend who did part of it, or a social media post where somebody did a part of it. And the more I started looking at it, I laid out a plan. And I laid out a plan that if I could build up my walking to sustain 15 miles per day for 5 weeks, I could do the whole 500-mile Camino. In and of itself, that seemed mind-boggling. And I can tell you, before I left for the Camino, the longest walk that I had done was a 15-mile once a week. So to think about doing 15 miles every day. However, I got myself together. I had somebody come that could take care of what was then both my dogs, chickens, and horses. And I flew over with the mindset that there's a possibility I can't do this, but come, pardon the French, hell or high water, I am going to do my level best to get up every morning and walk that 15 miles. I would say the first week was the hardest, which is very typical because that's the physical part. And then it got easier and easier to the point that I didn't even feel my feet on the ground. I was so engaged with the scenery and the sun and the smells and the experience and the buen camino that you say to people as they pass, and to go through the different towns and to have the different experiences, so that when it was time, when it was a couple of days before I was due to arrive in Santiago, I didn't want it to end. I didn't want that experience to stop. And I can tell you that I did it with no blisters, no injuries. And it's a living example for me to be able to share with people that when you're committed and you get things set up right, which for writing a book, you need to set up the times that you're going to do this. You got to schedule it in. You got to do it come hell or high water, whether you put 2 words down on the page or 200 words on the page. But you have to be committed to the process, committed to the goal. And if you are, you'll do it. So for the writing process, if we put something on our schedule every day, 5 days a week, you pick your schedule and you find a space, an environment that's going to support it. Because for me, it was, where was I going to walk? Where was I going to enjoy walking? And I found that I didn't want to get in my car and drive to a starting point. I wanted to walk out my door so that I could begin to mirror the experience of walking out an albergue in Spain and going on my walk. So I started walking out my door, which is a very hilly, rural environment. And then what paths could I take once I got into a place that there were options? And I started to experiment with what paths felt more in alignment with me. which paths were easier for me to add miles on. And I don't mean easier as in flat, and, because flat isn't necessarily easy. When you're doing up and down along with flat, you use different muscles. So when I could find the environments that supported adding an extra mile, then of course those were the places that I went to. And the same is true with writing. If you find that taking your laptop and going into your bedroom is the place where you get your longest mileage, then keep doing that. If you find that taking your laptop and going to a coffee shop is where you can get that extra mile or that extra 100 words, then do that. And nobody is exactly the same. Like for me, I need quiet. I need that rural environment where I can look out and see the trees and the birds. If I go into a Starbucks where it's noisy, and I've had to do that when I lose internet, I can't concentrate. Where some people, that's their zone. They love the people around them and the chatter. So we're all different individuals, but you have to find where is that zone for you.
And that's key, especially when you're talking about these stopping points. I really think it's powerful, the idea that you wrote it down, you committed, you said, I'll do this every day. But then what you said about, how do I make it fun for myself? How do I make it enjoyable? And instead of how much can I get done? Because if it's too big, that's a stopping point. That is a
Yes.
stopping point, right?
Yes.
But making it enjoyable gets you past that. And then
Yes.
what you're talking about, building that muscle. I'd love to hear more about that, building the muscle. So you're saying small little steps stacked?
Yeah, and I want to bring the building the muscle back to what you said about making it fun. Children don't want to come in when they're playing outside. When you call them in and say it's dinner time, or it's time for you to come in and do your chores or whatever it is, they're in their zone and time stops for them. They will stay out and play and play and play as long as you let them play, because it's fun. And when we not only have the commitment to do a project like writing a book, when we bring in the fun element, which I was talking about with finding fun places to walk, we go into that zone where we don't want to stop. So the two things really go hand in hand. When we can be in that childlike place of curiosity, like trying to find the right path, find where the zone is, when we can be in that place like, oh, this feels really good, you can lock in that feeling, know that you can come back and experience that. That's, the two go hand in hand. You're building a muscle, but you're also finding a place of joy. And joy is the highest level frequency. So when we are in that frequency, and when we doubt, we're in a low frequency.
Yeah.
And it's going to bring everything down. And it's a
Right.
stopping point, which is the topic of today's conversation. So when we do these things that bring the frequency up, and we lock in that we're doing this, and we're building more time into it so that we don't want to stop because it's fun, and we are committed that even if the day isn't so much fun, that we're going to come back with it with the intention and the high level frequency that we are committed and we're going to do this. Like going to the gym. Sometimes you go to the gym and you're really ready to exercise, and sometimes you go like, oh, it's time to go to the gym. I don't really feel like it right now. But you know that if you go and you start to exercise, it flips the switch, right?
Well, and also that plays into, and you haven't talked about this yet, so maybe we can go here now, the end being an actual vision that you want, that you can so deliciously see that it actually propels you forward, versus a fantasy. That's a nice to have because I want the accolades. That's not going to bring you forward.
No, I mean, what I love to do is work with people who have a compelling message that keeps coming from their heart, keeps them awake at night. They think about, they wish for, they dream of, but they don't know where to start. They've had these three things of lack of clarity, low confidence, lack of commitment. And I love to bring that up because that mission is something that's not only going to transform them when they birth it. There's a reason why people call people who do the work that I do midwives. And I hesitate to that, but there is a birthing process that happens. The person changes. And in getting that message that, like a child, will go out into the world makes a difference. Because, you can be here for the ages if you choose to. And that means you're not here for yourself, even though you are the vessel, you are the one that's doing the work. But the birth of this message that goes out into the world that supports the vision that you have is not about you. It's about the people that you're helping. And for me, that helps me get out of my way. Like, this isn't about me.
No, it's huge. It's huge. Do you ever have to stop people from looking at all of the details so that they don't freak themselves out?
Oh, yeah, the details are stopping points, and the details will really squelch the creativity. For people who aren't writers and have a message, it's really just like throw up on the page. Like, just don't worry about the word structure. Don't worry about it being in a perfect readable form. Just get your heart, like, get out of your head and get back into your heart. Let your heart speak. The details can be taken care of later. That's what we call editors.
I've asked you this before, but for the purposes of our audience, I'm going to ask you this again because this was in private. I asked you this. What are your feelings then if staying out of your own way and seeing when you're writing stops you? How do you feel about dictating and then having that transcribed? Would
You
that
can
be a way to do it?
absolutely do that. If you can, like, for me, I'm not an auditory person, although I will say, and you know this, I wrote a children's book when I was walking once because I was visualizing the characters. And so the words would come to me about what that character would say. And I would pull out my phone and I would just like send myself a verbal email, an audio email. So I would have it when I got home. So when creativity hits, get it down, capture it. What I wouldn't want to see somebody do is dictate, as in perfect word structure, as in you're giving it to a clerical person to transcribe perfectly. We don't want that to happen. But if
Right.
you can speak from your heart and let it flow, like, be a preacher. Preachers don't think about what they're going to say. They get up on the podium and they just preach, and they're getting the message and then they're letting it come out. If you can do a transcription that is like a preacher, the answer is yes.
So do you ever encounter people then who are attached to what they think the manuscript's supposed to look like and it's
Oh,
actually stopping
absolutely.
them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can tell you so many times, because it is a creative process. Sometimes the manuscript comes out exactly as the person originally envisioned because they had the clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when it's a little wobbly at the beginning, then not being attached is really good, because then we just go into the creative process
Mm-hmm.
and let it unfold. And because you and I have also spoken about this, is that sometimes people want to put everything they've ever learned in their whole life and they want to share with the world in one book. People in this world, even though I read a quote from the 1700s, but people in this world don't want to read 300 pages. They'd rather read 3 100-page books, because if they can get one takeaway in that first book that lights them up and moves them on, your job has been accomplished. Then you can offer a second book that person will come back and buy, and it lights them up and they move out into the world, rather than they get a book that they just can't get through and it goes on the shelf and is never pulled off again.
Mm-hmm. And you also said to me, and I think it is worth sharing, and I think could be extrapolated, it doesn't matter what it is you're doing, business or books or anything. Sometimes the right answer comes 200 pages in.
Absolutely. I belong to a network called the Genius Network, and really phenomenal people, authors. I love it. I love, love, love my group. But one of the people who has been with Joe Polish started the Genius Network, and Joe has been on sabbatical this year. So a man that he has worked with, Timothy Paulson, they've worked together for 20 years. He's always been, we have a monthly meeting, and he's always the welcoming. He's the hello, how are you? Nice to see you, calling on people, like warming up the crowd, so to speak. And then it begins. Well, this last one that we had last Thursday and Friday was the annual event. And Timothy opened with a presentation. And it was the first time I really, really got Timothy. Now, I knew that he had just graduated with his doctorate in divinity. I knew that he had just launched a book, and I knew that he was leaving the Genius Network in February to go off and follow his own path, which I think is a great it's a great example of somebody that was on a road for 20 years and now is deviating and going off to do his own work. But in any event, the presentation he gave, his father was a famous painter, and I knew that Timothy is a painter, but he went through multiple steps of well, I would say birthing a business, although that wasn't really the term. But he showed how sometimes when you're painting, you paint something that you really don't like, and you know what, you can paint over it. And he said sometimes in the middle it gets messy.
Yeah.
And I thought that's such a great metaphor that I'm going to use, that I'm using here for all of you, because the writing process gets messy, but that's great because the outcome is beautiful. And when we try and make it all neat and perfect along the way, we've locked ourselves in and we haven't allowed that unfolding to take place.
I think there's a, and I cannot remember who told it to me, but there was a story I heard, I think it was last week, that Stephen King did that. He was writing one of his books and he got, I don't know, it was 190 or 200 and something pages in and realized, like I said, this is where the story started. And he tossed the first,
Yeah,
literally the first book. He's like, that's not the story. The story starts here. And I
yeah,
thought, oh,
yeah,
good God.
yeah. Well, that's why I call it, when we talk about the golden idea, which we discussed on the first call, and it's a digging process. It's an excavation process. And
Hmm.
so that digging is the writing. That digging is the opening, like of the tunnel, if we want to call it that, until we get to that. Now, sometimes the gold comes early, and sometimes it takes a while, but we have to allow ourselves the latitude to let it get messy
Yeah.
and to
And
know that it's not going to be perfect from the first word, and to
mhm.
just get into the process. And going back to the example, I got to tell you, that first week on the Camino was not easy. My body hurt. It was raining. It was hilly. It was slippery. We were walking areas, and we as a collective, because like I said, I was doing it my own, but there were areas that it was slate and going downhill, that with the slipperiness of the rain, and we're using poles, but people were falling. I mean, it was not easy, but it got easier until my body adjusted, until my mind adjusted that I'm going to be sleeping someplace different every night. Some of them are comfortable, some of them aren't comfortable, some of them are going to have some privacy, some are going to be men and women together in the same room, snoring and changing clothes. It got messy until I adapted, and then everything became quite beautiful.
You kind of take those, as you talked about earlier, your fear and your lack of clarity and your low confidence, you take those little steps and those little steps and those little steps until the commitment has gone so far that there is no going back because you kind of stepped over the threshold at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say there were people in the Camino that bailed. Some of them had to bail because they injured themselves. And that's, you injure yourself, there's nothing you can do, and it can happen to anybody along the way. But some people bailed because they just got tired,
Not committed.
not committed.
Yeah.
And boy, I gotta tell you, that devil is on your shoulder on the Camino, like, oh my gosh, I could just catch a taxi to the next stop. I could just not do the rest of the trail for the day. But I was committed that when I got to Santiago and I went to the office, they've got an office that you go to and you show your passport, because you get stamped every time you go through a town. There's a stamp that goes in the passport, and they want to see that you've done at least 100 miles, and then you get a certificate that you have completed the Camino de Santiago. And I was in integrity where I was not going to take a shortcut. As long as I was able physically to do it, I was going to overcome the mental demons that made me say, oh, I'm tired. It really would be nice to sit down and just get a ride to the next stop. And nobody would know. You could cheat and nobody would know.
Yeah.
But
that's your stopping point.
I was like, boy, when I finish, I want to know I walked every single step of that Camino.
And on that note, and on that beautiful metaphor for life, indeed, we are at the end of our time today. We could go forever, you and me. Like we can talk for hours. It's amazing.